What was the situation where you thought, FCK, I'm going to be fired for sure, but it turned out completely fine?
AskClaptron 3000 says fell asleep for 3 hours. Nobody came in to talk to me, so I wasn't discovered.
Nathaniel 66 says I work on a production line, manager, of quite expensive toys. In the middle of the process we noticed that we used wrong material, and stopped the line. Everybody was freaking out, that we're all going to be fired, they're gonna charge us for this and so on. There were ideas how to fix it without anybody noticing it, and I've made a very hard decision to be completely open with my superiors, our co-operators and our customer. I described in details how we found out about mistake, how we double verified it was truly wrong material and so on, and my superior gave me promotion, and our co-operators found they have some holes in the system that allowed to mark the material not properly, and fixed it, and our customer was not happy about delay, but also impressed with quality control and transparent information that we provided.
Sabzan Anonymous says a colleague who had just been told he was going to be made redundant sent out a fuck our email to a wide slew of the customer base, and staff then trashed our development as /400. Yes, I'm an old guy. He did it by logging on remotely using my login details. 2 months of suspension, suspicion, investigation, and me crapping myself until it was finally tracked it down to him. They apologized, gave me a pay rise, and asked me not to seek recourse with him as it was in the hands of the police. He and I discussed it about 2 years later. It was a short conversation.
Crochet Prozac says recently actually, I work in phone support for a big business and I was still learning the phone system. We have 2 different types of call transfer button and consult, which means you place the caller on hold and go first so you can fill in another agent, and blind, which means you just send the person to a random boss working the floor that day. And rules state we have to consult every call and never blind transfer, or else we will get in a lot of trouble. Anyway, we are all taking calls, and I get this customer who is just not having the greatest of days and has decided the best way to deal with his day is yelling at somebody who literally just can't help him solve his problem. And we're going around in circles on the phone. I'm getting my ass verbally handed to me, and I can't hang up on the guy because company policy, so when he asks to speak to my manager, I oblige and open the phone book, hover over the department manager's name and click. Blind? No Y fingers? Why? And all of a sudden, the big boss, the manager of the manager's phone, begins to ring and screaming on the inside, no, no. No, bang. The big boss is looking around as he picks up the phone, sees my look of complete horror and picks it up. And I'm sitting there, getting another call, trying not to look over at him, but after 5 minutes he's finished and starts walking over to me, and I'm like, well, I had a job, and he pats me on my shoulder and says your face is priceless right now, and walks off. Bang, he didn't care. My office team still make fun of me for that. Maple Danish says a flight paramedic in my town backed an ambulance into a fixed-wing aircraft and damaged the wing. Minimum 00000 damage. The funny thing is, all paramedics are trained on runway protocols with a land ambulance. This training manual is provided by the Air Ambulance Service. Except they don't train their flight medics on it because they almost never have to drive an ambulance. And so the guy got off without even a warning. They did email the manual to all the flight medics though, lol.
Mokajava1 says worked as a research assistant while in college. My boss worked with my brains and gave me a couple practice ones to learn how to slice and mount them onto microscope slides. Eventually, she let me move on to the real thing. She literally said, this brain is really important. I've been working on experiments with this mouse for 6 months. In my anxious state I dropped it down the drain with the water running. She was not happy in the slightest, but didn't fire me at least.
Fluffy Assassin says I messed up some details on a project and they called me and I thought I was in some shit. They re like, you sound a little off today. You mind going home? Employees don't want to catch anything. I am just like, fuck yeah, it was awesome, and I went home and slept and slept and slept and slept.
Cell6 says I am a teacher. I broke up a fight. To break up the fight I had to punch a kid in his stomach. He was on the ground gasping for air while I pulled him off the other kid.
The Midnight Scorpion says when a guy paid me with 20 counterfeit 00 bills. I hadn't been trained on how to spot fakes, so I had no idea they weren't real.
Softy Boy says had a horrible system at my fast food job where if a person took out their card too soon, the whole system would restart itself. It sucked. I usually told people to just go sit down and it'd get them when it restarted to pay. I did this, and then promptly went on break and forgot I'd ever said anything. Order was around 0, and they never had to pay. Noticed my manager staring at the order and quickly turned right back around and was never confronted.
Sis0 says I work at Walmart, and every time I drop a jar of spaghetti sauce I think to myself this is it.
Country Run by Apes says kind of the opposite. I had booked a few vacation days to help my mom move to Florida. While in Florida, employer called me 6 days before I was scheduled to be home and said they needed me the next day, no exceptions. That was 1,600 miles that they wanted me to drive non-stop for a 4-hour shift in the afternoon the next day. I made the trip. I worked my shift. Then they fired me after my shift for no apparent reason, found out later that my boss did this on purpose to prove a point to some fresh blue blood employees. I was livid, but there was nothing I could have done. However, the employer was a, now former, friend of my mom's and all of her retired bridge club friends. After the news got out that she had made me drive 24 hours at the drop of a hat simply to fire me, which incidentally cost my mom 00 in movers fees to finish the move that I wasn't able to, she lost enough of her local patrons that she couldn't sustain the business and filed for bankruptcy less than a year later.
Who 717 says I was a cooking instructor for a camp. Kids lied to me about not being religious to eat something besides the vegan menu. They walked up to me later saying that it was nice to break the laws of their religion. Edit, guidelines not laws.
That one VR guy from All says first day at my first job out of uni, I pushed my code changes straight on to develop. I landed a great gig as a junior software developer at one of the very few studios in my city, and was loving it, but got distracted when pushing some code. Instead of my feature branch, develop suddenly had this untested bit of fresh graduate muck all over it. I was freaking out thinking they were going to fire me and give me a fine or something, but they were really chill and understanding about it all. Never made a no-legit mistake again though.
Following Boy 123 says I was a teacher, accidentally said the F word in front of the students since they were provoking me. None of the students bothered reporting it to the principal. I felt like I was pretty lucky.
People are irksome says I had a bad jaw infection because of a tooth. The doctor put me on antibiotics and gave me Tylenol with codeine. I took 2 before I went into work and brought the bottle with me. Well, after an hour the pain was still killing me, so I took another 2. Repeat every hour for 3 hours. Let's just say I could not stand up straight and was really out of it. Someone noticed me wobbling and got the boss. He came over and asked me if I was alright and what was wrong, so I told him. He asked me where the bottle was and then took it and locked it in his desk drawer. He walked back over to my workstation with a chair and asked if I was okay to keep working. I told him I was, so he sat me in the chair and let me continue. Never said a word to me about it after and gave me the bottle back at the end of the day.
My legis missing says I let a guy walk out with about 0 worth of food because it was my second day and I had no idea how to ring up phone orders. Another time my drawer came up 0 shot. I still don't know what happened, but I never heard anything about it after that day.
Forking Ashhole says was meant to be at work at 5 a.m. Missed alarms and woke up at 10 a.m. The other shift was starting at 9. Couldn't get in and called my boss who had the store open before I got there. My boss's boss came in at 1, walked past me on a smoke break and asked what happened. I could try to make up an excuse, but I slept in. Plain and simple. Slept through all my alarms. I'm really sorry, boss was expecting an excuse. Don't let it happen again. I'll do my best. Verbal warning. Opened the next morning.
Lockboy28 says worked in the oil field for a while. One of the plant operators would sleep all day, for some reason, in his office chair, with his hands head on the desk. One day, some of the higher-ups walked into the room. I was pretty sure he was about to get fired without skipping a beat. He said in Jesus' name, Amen, and then stood up to greet everybody. The boss nodded his approval and they all started talking about the plant. The guy got caught sleeping on the job, and managed to look good doing it.
Flakester says I accidentally overwrote the configuration for a remote flagship branch router 800 miles away when I was using it as reference for another device I was working on. I brought down the branch during business hours and lost connectivity, so there was no fixing it remotely. I was able to convince the branch manager to reboot it and it restored itself with a startup config that is saved whenever you write changes to memory. Everyone chalked it up to a circuit outage and moved on with their day.
Shinasfan says I worked in a call center for an internet provider and website host. I literally told one of our biggest customers, I believe it was actually the biggest, the dude had a website and 10 internet links with us, to find another provider. Since he was being overbearing and even said it was generally better just to pressure us, the attendants, instead of sending their own technicians to solve internal problems. Then, obviously, he said he wanted to talk with the manager, and I, very respectfully, denied this require, since I was doing my part of the protocol. Then, he threatened to call the commercial sector and talk to their manager himself. A little context here, the commercial was a shit. They're pretty much on the customer's side every single freaking time. I thought it was the end for me, but here comes the plot twist. The commercial indeed transferred the call to their manager, but he was busy and told them to just transfer to the CEO, and oh lord, they actually did it. The CEO himself told the guy to find another provider. Edit, a word.
There goes Joe says I work at a radio station and one time accidentally deleted an entire commercial break and just played newsroom music on top of it and literally no one noticed.
Photon Magnet says went joy riding in a work vehicle, think heavy duty golf cart, and hit a jump and landed on the front of the vehicle. Broke the plastic and mangled the radiator. Buddy and I pushed it back and went to tell the boss. Told him we crashed into a stump and were really sorry, and he was just happy we told him instead of parking it and not saying anything.
Omega Ranoch says I elbowed the CO in the nuts whilst I was trying to get a box out that had gotten stuck. Did not realize he was behind me, until I heard the pathetic whimper and the thud.
Deleted, says, deleted.
DRUNKXXLAHEY says old job. I was on really good terms with the people who owned the restaurant at the office. When they closed at 3 and left, they wouldn't care if I went into the cafe after hours and took whatever I wanted and just paid them the next day. Security had been watching me do this and were going to have me arrested and fired of course, and decided to bring in the police before even consulting with the people who ran the restaurant. They called them and they did not answer, and I thought I was cooked and going to jail. Luckily she called back and gave them the all clear and told them to continue to allow me to do it. I always overpaid them on purpose for being given the privilege, so they didn't want that to end. I shot the head of security lady. The biggest fuck you, I told you so. Should have listened. Look, I have ever given in my life. Felt good.
Explosion says I just started my apprenticeship in a hotel and was maybe there for 3 or 4 months. Up until the 6th month they can fire you for any reason. They don't even need to give you one. After the 6th month trail you really need to fuck up for them to be able to fire you. That day I was working with the manager of the banquet department. We finished our work around 2 hours into our shift and got bored. He then had the great idea of chilling on the rooftop and get some beer food on. I was hesitant because I was new, but hey, he is the manager, I will just go. I had nothing to do anyways. We grabbed another apprentice and went to the roof. The 2 guys had maybe 4 or 5 beers while I was drinking coke. I always hid their bottles behind a wall, in case someone would come up. All of a sudden we see 2 policemen, 2 security guys from the hotel and our duty manager get on the roof. We all just froze. Police tells us people called, saying there are people doing suspicious things on the roof, and due to it being next to the airport, they needed to investigate in case of terrorism. They took our names and checked our data and left. Duty manager had to write and report on what happened. I was sure I could pack my bags. Next day followed. I got called into HR and they told me that I fucked up. I was like, yeah, I know. I was ready to get fired. They gave me a warning letter and I left. Say GPS says mine's a happy one. I had called off Monday and Tuesday due to a depression spiral. By Wednesday I just straight up told my boss what was happening. He told me to take the rest of the week off to feel better. Lori02 says I'm an associate software engineer in my company and I took care of our code signing device, Smart Card, for at least 3 months until I completely lost it a month ago. Production deployment was hold off, not even hotfixes on our very first deployment, until the new device was shipped to us. My team is offshore. Obviously I got incident reports here and there. Apparently the device costs a few hundred USD or so. I was told that last Tuesday. I was told by one of my bosses that we're having a serious talk, and so I was hinting goodbyes to my teammates. It was actually my birthday and she handed me an envelope as a gift. I thought it was a birthday card. Turns out it was the newly shipped smart card. Everyone knew what was happening except me.
Cold at last first says I was the security guard on my second week. It was raining pretty hard, making a lot of mud. I dropped the keys almost as soon as my shift started. Couldn't find them. Had to call it in. Supervisor came to help me look. It was my main job to secure the gates, and for that I would need keys. She was talking about writing me up, but the manager decided against it. The dispatch that night never forgot and would bring it up to all the new hires.
Almundus says was working and living at a wedding venue. Got dropped off by police shit-faced and covered in yogurt just as a wedding party arrived. Was literally hoses down but didn't get fired. At least not for that. With Teeth09 says worked as a detailer for Harley Davidson for a bit seasonally. Hadn't rode before, no experience aside from a love of things with a motor and some good work ethic. After each wash we'd push the bikes to the storage. First day I dropped a 30k bike. I got better, but over the course of working there I knocked over 7 bikes. Instead of firing me they called me lucky since no bike was ever damaged. Note I got much better at balance after this.
My type 10 says I, 16 degrees Fahrenheit at the time, used to work at this fancy pet store for rich people. They could come in and pay to wash their dogs in this side room, and the benefit was that we cleaned up all the hairy mess. I loved cleaning it because if there was not someone waiting I could spend half an hour in there making it super clean and it would help time pass by. One day a customer F came in with her dog, can't recall the type but it was big, and proceeded to use the wash. I was working with just me and my manager, 50-ish at time, so I went in to clean the dog wash. I couldn't reach over the big metal tub very well, so I had to use a step stool to reach in. There was a hose attached to the wall, so I would rinse all the hair into this hair catcher thing by the drain, and then place the hose back onto the wall. I did this and cleaned out the hair and then went on to dry it with the dryer hose. The hose was super loud and this was the time-consuming part. After approximately 15 minutes, because I like my alone time, the tub was completely dry and I stepped off my step stool to a finished job. When I stepped off the stool, I stepped into about 3 inches of water because I hadn't turned the hose off all the way and it had been leaking the whole time. I started panicking and used the guest towels to push as much water into the floor drain as I could, but the towels were no match for this tsunami I made. I frantically went outside in search of more towels, pushing a decent amount of water out of the room when I opened the door, and lo and behold my manager was there with a customer waiting for the dog Washington. I chilled and slyly walked over to where she was standing to grab the towels from under the counter. "Is the dog wash ready?" "Me, 1 sec." I went back in there but the towels were no use. Defeated, I walked back out to my manager and tell her the truth. Well, slightly the truth. Not really the truth, but it's her truth now. Manager name. You will not believe what happened. The guest before left the hose on and flooded the room. And I've been trying to clean it the whole time, but the towels are no use. She goes, I knew that lady was no good, let me see the room. So we go over to the room and she's appalled in the audacity of the guest, and obviously I am pretending to be as well. She goes, she was trying to flood the whole store, and I'm like, what are we gonna do? This genius whips out a squeegee and blesses me with the gift and squeegeeing this water into a drain. I do everything with the guilt eating me alive, but get it done for the guest. My manager complains about the guest flooding the store for the rest of the night, and each time I think she's just trying to get me to confess. The next morning I go into work super worried that someone would look at the security tapes, and while there were no cameras in the dog room, you could see me go in for 30 minutes and then water starting to drip out during that time. I am ready to confess my guilt and ask for forgiveness, because my manager and I were opening together. When I get there, she's already there on a phone with a manager at another location, a manager name you will not believe what happened last night. A guest tried to flood our whole damn store, but my name fixed everything. I guess I never got caught, but I should have been fired, so I hope it still counts.
Zeppelincheater says I ruined the clutch in the work vehicle. I suck at using stick shift, and before I started work my boss was having a new clutch put in. Only took 3 months for me to ruin the new clutch. Boss was furious, thought I was going to be fired for sure, but I am still there.
Daisy TJ says about 4 years ago, I had a company card. I found some things that the office used were cheaper on Amazon than through our usual stationery supplier, so used the company card to get them. Next time I went on Amazon, it remembered the last card I used and automatically put my order on that. Unfortunately, this was the company card. I know I should have checked this. It was a small amount, so I didn't realize it had come out of the wrong account until I did my monthly tally of spending on the company card, and I panicked to see this clothing order on there. I came clean to my manager, shaking as I told her, but she was okay and just asked me to pay the money back, and we put it down to an honest mistake with no repercussions.
Babishot 1044 says I deleted a production database once. It was very bad news. The reason I didn't get fired was because the DBA involved should have checked the request with my boss first. I basically specified the wrong server. I was fairly new, and gave them the production instance rather than the dev instance. Dev would have required no authorization. The good news is it was backed up. Of course I was praised for owning up straight away, and procedures were changed so it wouldn't happen again. Made me feel sick as hell though.
Mariosking says 2 nights ago I was sorting out the banking at work. Recently promoted, and first few weeks doing so, I was given a pod full of cash and I put it in the chute to go to the office. Chute breaks, but I managed to fix it and get all the pods out, or so I thought. Checking it off and 1K is missing, and it is the pod I put in the chute myself. Purged the system and nothing else came out. Searched everywhere thinking I lost it or I didn't put it in the chute. Basically second guessing everything I did that night. Distraught thinking I lost it, call my manager to explain the situation. She says it's fine, don't worry, it won't be lost, it is probably stuck in the system. I get annoyed and upset thinking I'm fucked. I hit the chute and out falls the pod.
Duchess Keys says I was a server, and after a particularly long stressful week this old man came in and berated me for everything. At one point I just started laughing and said, "Jesus Christ dude, chill," and immediately went to find my manager. Turns out the guy wasn't even supposed to be in the restaurant anymore because he always skipped on his bill, so my managers just ignored what happened.
Flux says I was 15/16. I worked and still work at a retirement home as a server. The Sunday shifts are always slow, and at the time this one boy worked there who I was pretty good friends with outside of work, and we messed around a lot when there was nothing to do. While we were waiting for something to do, we went and played hangman on a piece of paper. We were just fucking around, so the answers were all pretty weird and fucked up, such as guys, I think I have cancer and my name sucks dick for free. I ended up having to leave early, and asked him to throw the pieces of paper we used away. I came back for a dinner shift a day or so later and my boss asks me to come with her. I was a good kid, and we were friendly, so I jokingly say, am I in trouble? And she just doesn't respond. Yikes. I follow her into a conference room with her and her boss, with all of the pieces of paper we used in front of them. I started bawling. Apparently a resident had found them. At the end of it, they essentially just gave me a slap on the wrist, but being my first job and my first real fuck up, I was scared shitless. The boy was a regular troublemaker and got put on probation, and was fired a month or so later for vaping in the bathrooms. Pro tip for all bosses out there: if you have to yell at an employee, maybe do it at the end of the shift, not at the very beginning. You'll save everyone a couple hours of emotional distress and embarrassing tears.
Jockelson says was doing work for a difficult customer. Customer emailed several people within my company and theirs, about all the stuff that went wrong in their perception, how it was all my fault, etc. They were actually unreasonable. Many things were not my fault, and some things were utter lies. I did a reply all and took out all the customer addresses from the to field, and gave my view on the whole situation to my colleagues. Without getting nasty, I stayed professional, etc. Immediately got a call from my superior, yelling at me. Apparently I forgot to check out the CC field as well, so my email went to some people of their company. Got called into the boss's office the next day, was sure that I would be in trouble. Luckily he wasn't upset at all, agreed that this customer were total a-holes, but I do have to be a bit more careful with the reply all button. Lesson well learnt. Always check where your email is going to. When typing a new email, enter the recipients after writing the email.
Nut Butter and Jelly says, okay, so I work in a fast food restaurant, and only work a couple days a week cause my mom drives me. Well, she took a vacation, so I had to request the week off, otherwise I wouldn't have a ride. About halfway into the week off, I called and asked what my next week's schedule was, because it was already posted. The girl on the phone went and looked, and said I was not on the schedule at all. My stomach dropped 10 stories down. I was so afraid of being fired, as I loved having my own cash, living in a lower middle class home. This was exciting, and enjoyed my job. Turns out the GM made the schedule for the upcoming week instead of the normal manager who does it, and had just forgotten all about me. I was so relieved.
Waywalkert says I used to work with older adults with mental challenges. We would do chores together and cook together. Give them a safe home and help them live in it. One day I was taking my client to the laundromat in her complex. She was a bit unsteady on her feet, so I told her to wait at the stairs as I took the laundry up, then I would help her. She didn't listen and fell straight backwards on the first step, cracking her head. There was a lot of blood. Everything was okay and my bosses understood. I tried my best to keep her safe. I was terrified though. Head wounds bleed a lot.
KVR says I was 17 working at a summer camp when a group of youth aged 13 were sent to my room to support. I had a group of 8 to 9-year-olds that were rambunctious. Things were going normally when several of the youth were sitting around and one of my kids were tripped. They all laughed and the kid bolted out of the room and then out of the building. One of the other staff went after the child while in a rage took all the youth into the hallway and began to cuss out every single one of them. I knew as soon as I dropped the first F-bomb I would be talking to my super manager and probably fired, so I went in. To the point, one of the kids said, "You're going to get fired, dude. You can't talk to us like that," and I responded, "I don't give a fuck as long as my child is safe. And you fuckers never do something stupid like this again." My super and manager spoke to me. I was honest and sincere about the situation, and they asked me to leave for the rest of the day. I worked with the company for 8 years after the situation, as a lead counselor in both the summer camp and school program.
Editka says I work in a shipping receiving department for a company and my coworker was working with a customer that needed 2 duplicate packages of parts for his machine. The customer wanted one next day air and one regular ground. My coworker had accidentally sent the first package regular ground instead of next day air. The customer called the next day and I happened to be the one to pick up the phone and he had asked where his package was. My coworker didn't want to admit that he had messed up, so I decided to cover for him and told the customer that there was a systematic error and it looks like the package somehow got changed to ground. I assured him that we would contact our shipping services and redirect the package. He seemed to understand my coworker and I came up with the idea that we could just send the second package with next day air and all will be good as new like nothing happened. Man, were we wrong? The general manager contacted my coworker and said that how can something like this happen? He then responded with I'm not too sure how the system messed up like that. So the GM said that he had a friend that works for our shipping service and that's when my coworker's heart dropped. It was a small pause and then the GM said, unfortunately, he's on vacation. That's when my coworker felt much better. When we had sent the next day air, our shipping service had lost our package, which delayed the ETA for the customer's package. When the customer finally got the package, our shipping service was telling the customer about how they think that their supplier, my company, is being shady because the shipping dates don't match up. GM calls my coworker again to confirm that they indeed got the package and everything is good. The GM also said what the shipping service had told him. Your supplier is being shady because the shipping dates don't match up. He also added, I know that the shipping service are the ones trying to be shady because they lost our package. All we can do is agree with him. Honestly, the scariest thing we could have done. It was a stressful 2 weeks.
Aminosid says backstory, the state I live in is at will so they can terminate us for any reason. On top of that, I was a contract to hire. We had it scheduled so that I would work the week before Christmas because a lot of people were not working the last 2 weeks. We had to have 2 people minimum and it's very safety oriented job. That weekend, before I worked, I bought a TV for my mom on sale for Xmas. I brought it home, almost got in a wreck, but managed to avoid it and honked at the idiot. Got home, unboxed TV, set it on the floor and hooked it up to her DVR. She liked it and I went to disconnect it so that I can put it in the box and install it the next day. As I walked towards it, I had socks on. I walked over the rug and the first step I took on the laminate caused me to slip. Tried to stop myself and grabbed a hold of the new TV. Since it was a flat TV and just sitting on the floor, it started to fall. With my left hand on the TV and it at an angle, I braced my fall with my right hand on the floor at the same time my chin hit the top of the TV. My right wrist broke and folded onto my arm. All I remember is a boom, impact on chin, and a cut fight, my mom screaming as she saw it happen. Her reaction was to straighten out my wrist and yell at me. Anyways, I texted my manager, as we got ready to go to the urgent care, and told him what happened. Next day, the boss called and said he heard what happened. I thought I was getting let go because now I can't do my job safely and I am a contractor who will miss work. He said to take the week off and come back on the 2nd of the new year and we will figure something out. I had also emailed my hiring agent and informed him the night of the incident. He called me after New Year's and was like, I have no idea what the fuck you're doing, but they must love you. I called them and they said they're gonna move you to the office for database management. I've never seen this before. Another time, before the job from above, I used to detail cars for the auction and did not pay attention to the dually truck while pulling into the garage. The dually hit the side of the doorway and cracked. This was a custom painted truck and I was like fuck. My boss called the lot manager, his friend, and I was trembling. Manager comes up and looks at it and says, you worried about this shit? He pulled up the panel, taped it with scotch tape, made me get a can of regular black spray paint, and painted over the crack line. The paint job had some lines similar to that with random widths and whatnot, so he just made it look like it belonged there. He told his crew to make that the last vehicle and don't stop driving it through the auction. It sold and no one noticed. I thought I was gonna be fired and have to pay like 500 plus just to fix that truck. Nothing came of it because all sales were final.
The EZG says I worked at a Wendy's when I was in high school. There was an area in the back that was open to the elements from the top, but walled in. In this area there were doors on each side, one connecting to the back of the restaurant, one going out into the parking lot. One was to a storage room where cups and containers and straws and such were kept, and one went to the freezer where there were crates and crates of buns. The central area was used by the smokers for their breaks, but it was also where we would toss out bags of trash and empty boxes, and also set aside empty bun crates which would be collected by the bun delivery person when a new shipment came in. I was out in that central area during the late night shift hanging around with a fellow employee who was a smoker. I had with me for some reason a can of this PAM type stuff that was sprayed on the grill, and, being a high schooler, I had the bright idea to use the can of spray to draw a gigantic penis onto the wall, testicles included. This thing was seriously massive. If you walk out of that door coming from the back of the restaurant, it was right there in your face and next to the door going out to the parking lot, probably about 6 feet tall and equally wide. The wall was a light gray and the giant member I had sprayed onto it was a darker gray, like the color it turned when it rained. I also had the bright idea that I could use one of my friend's lighters to burn it right back off of the wall. It did not work that way. It stayed. I went inside and got degreaser and other cleaners to try to scrub it off, but it just stayed. I was freaking out trying to figure out what I could do to get rid of the megaphallus. I thought I would for sure be fired. I was on the late night shift and it was somewhere around 1 a.m. and the night manager hadn't seen it. I used stacks of the crates that the buns were shipped to us on to cover it up, but I knew the next day they would be moved and eventually it would come out that I was the one who left the gigantic dong on the wall and I would surely be fired. I genuinely liked the guy who was the big manager over the restaurant and I felt so bad about doing something so stupid and immature and having to face the music with him and disappoint him. I wrote a note to him apologizing and saying I would do whatever it took to get that giant wang off of that wall and left it in the office for him. I also worked the lunch shift the next day and knew he would be there. My friend was just laughing through the whole ordeal. I sweated it out all night. I don't think I slept at all. And at 11 a.m. came to work fully prepared to be fired on the spot. I beat the manager there, and I went to the back and was surprised to see the giant pecker was completely gone. The whole area was empty. The bun crates had been taken away and the part of the wall where I had left my artwork was perfectly clear, just like it was before I had defiled it. I quickly ran into the office before the manager got there and threw away the envelope I had left for him with his name on it and continued on like nothing was ever wrong. The only thing I could think of was that maybe that PAM-type substance had absorbed into the wall overnight. Maybe it continued through the wall and then some time later there was a gigantic dong on the other side facing cars going through the drive-thru? Probably not. But to this day, every time I think about doing something that might get me in trouble, I think about how horrified I was of losing my burger flipping job at the age of 17 due to becoming Picasso just to get a laugh out of my dumb friend.
Cat's drinking beer says first weekend on a business trip with my boss at a hotel and she asks me to find out if we can use a private area for a conference call. I ask the front desk and the lady, we have a conference call we need to jump on. Is there a quiet space we can use? Sure. We have conference rooms. How long would you need it? Only a few hours. Sure. It's $350. Oh wow. Great. What if we used it the whole day? Same price. So we used that room for 2 days. I'm checking out and notice a 00 charge. I, in my naivety, assumed she meant 0.50 per hour, no number 50 per day, plus 0 per day for water service, plus tips and fees. The hotel rooms themselves weren't even 00 a night. I checked out at 4 a.m. so I couldn't talk to anyone. I tried calling before my flight to straighten it out but didn't get a hold of anyone. It was the only time I was on a plane that hit a lot of turbulence and thought, well, maybe it's not so bad if we go down. Then I don't have to tell my boss. It was fine in the end. We work for a multi-billion-dollar company, but man oh man was I prepared to pay that out of my paycheck to keep my job. Nithork 1441 says worked at a fireworks store, was stocking them, and knocked over a 15-foot wall of fireworks, breaking all of them, easily over 1K worth of fireworks.
Supernatural Heathen says accidentally broke an 800 touchscreen POS terminal at the Home Depot I worked at. Even though I only cracked the glass, they had to replace the entire terminal. Assistant store manager got super uppity and acted like I murdered his mother. I was young and he struck the fear of God into me. He had me quaking in my figurative boots. The next day, the store manager called me into his office and I thought I was done for. He ended up laughing about it with me and said, "It's okay, it happens. It was 800, but it happens. Could have been a lot worse."
Alejandro 4891 says I was being trained as a warehouse manager and I ended up overstocking the warehouse, seeing as how I worked on the floor and behind the scenes. I was constantly having to deal with customers that were upset because X product was sold out. To avoid doing that, I just tried to make sure that the most popular products were always in stock. The problem with that was that we never really knew how much business we'd be expecting. Some weeks, months were nuts, but sometimes it wasn't as good. It was unpredictable. So I just tried to make sure everything that we needed was available. The problem is that it started to add up and before we all knew it, the warehouse was completely overstocked to the point where we could hardly get in or out. It took maybe 2-3 months before everything got back to normal, and by then a lot of products were expired. Seeing as how we couldn't sell expired products to customers, They were all either thrown out or shipped back to the main distributors in the end. I cost the company thousands of dollars, but I wasn't fired or even yelled at. I owned up to the mistake and told my head supervisor that I wouldn't let it happen again. That's it. He pretty much just told me to use it as a learning experience and to prevent it from happening again. It's funny that he was completely calm understanding with this. But I eventually found out that he lied to me for around 6 months. He regularly promised me that a raise promotion was coming, mainly because of all the extra work I was doing despite holding the lowest paying position at the place I worked at. But I later found out that it was a lie and there's a chance that I was actually being held back by him. Kechiliho says very recently, I made a financial mistake at work that could have been easily avoided if I had been paying better attention. As soon as I discovered it, I panicked and assumed I was going to lose my job, which I happened to really love. I stewed over it for about half a day, and then decided to just go directly to my work and tell them exactly what happened and ask them how we could fix it, and it turned out to be really simple. It was a classic case where if I had just let it go it could have been really bad for me. But because I took the initiative and apologized and tried to fix it, and it all ended really well. In fact, this was very recently and I just had my employee review and it was the most glowing I've ever received in my life. I really like my job.
Mommy0123 says, so I had a coworker who had decided she deserved my job at a truck stop more than I did. I basically ignored her petty and childish behavior while working with her. We both worked graveyards one night. She tried calling in because she said her ride bailed on her. The manager working had me call my husband, but I was unable to reach him. So my sister-in-law went up to get coworker. Coworker was and still is my neighbor, and coworker told her no because she was adamant about not going to work, so manager sends one of the cashiers. They show up. Cashier and manager leaves, leaving me and coworker, so I was making myself a cup of coffee and coworker decided she was gonna rip me a new one. Tell me all how my husband was a piece of shit, worthless, lazy, and selfish, and she was going to give him a piece of her mind if he decides he isn't too big of a chicken to confront her. I ripped into her. I told her under no circumstances was she to ever talk about my husband the way she did, and she was to never speak to him like that, and I would beat her ass if she even looked at my husband wrong. It was an empty threat, but she didn't know that. Coworker decided to start calling me a bitch, a pansy, a fucking retard, a piece of shit mother, etc. You name it. I walked away and she continued the barrage over the radio. I shut my radio off and called the manager from the restroom. Well, I misunderstood what the manager told me to do and never turned my radio back on. Our radios were the only way for us to communicate with each other. So I went through my shift, turned in my radio at the end, and left. I would be lying if I didn't say I flipped off the coworker once I got to my car next night and I'm pulled aside by management. I'm at risk of getting fired for my behavior with coworker the night before. I told them I wasn't signing shit unless it was only for my radio being off, so my boss launches an investigation. Lo and behold, one of the waitresses from the restaurant in the truck stop and a truck driver came forward and told my boss that she was bragging about potentially getting me fired and costing me the Employee of the Month award I was due to win. Because if she didn't get EOTM, I didn't deserve it either. Coworker quit 2 months later. Boss came forward 3 months after coworker quit and told me she dropped everything because of the investigation.